Hey guys, it's Will. It's Hong Kong Cinema Appreciation Society. Welcome back to the channel. I hope you are doing well. If you are new to the channel, welcome and thank you for finding us. I'm going to be talking about a Taiwanese movie today. So I'm breaking the rules a little bit, but this is a filmmaker I absolutely love, who I've been obsessed with recently. I've reviewed two of his other films on the channel. Let me just show you the movie. It's Vive l'Amour. So I reviewed Rebels of the Neon God, which is a movie I talk about a lot on this channel and a lot in general because I absolutely freaking love that movie. I first saw that movie, I think about 10 or 11 years ago, and it's been one of my favorite discoveries of like the past decade or so. Then I saw Goodbye Dragon Inn earlier this calendar year. I think in February I watched that movie. Did a glowing review of that because that movie blew me away. And I am now here to do a glowing review of Vive l'Amour. I'm actually really excited about it. So the director's name is Tsai Ming-liang, who is also the writer. And I'm really excited about him at the moment because they're doing a retrospective on him at American Cinematheque, which is a nonprofit film organization in Los Angeles. And they operate three different theaters: the Egyptian in Hollywood, the Arrow in Santa Monica, and the Los Feliz 3. The Arrow in Santa Monica is like my favorite movie theater in the world. And they are showing this movie on a double feature with one of his other movies. And Tsai Ming-liang, the writer and director, is doing a Q&A along with Lee Kang-shang, who is one of the actors who's in all of his movies. So I'm like really excited about that. It's in about a month or so. So this movie was originally released in 1994. It won the Golden Lion at Venice in 1994. Excuse me. It stars Lee Kang-shang, Yang Kui-mei, and Chan Chow-yung. And the reason that sounds terrible is not that I can't read my handwriting. So I'm having trouble reading their names. They should be on here, actually. Yeah, Lee Kang-shang, Yang Kui-mei, and Chen Chow-jung. So those are the actors in the film. And so I have to talk about Rebels of the Neon God when I talk about this movie. What I'll say really briefly up front, if you're unfamiliar, is this is a drama. It does have elements of comedy in it. Some of it is very funny, but it's kind of like an art house drama film. It's not as slow cinema, quiet, esoteric as Goodbye Dragon Inn. If you saw my review of that film, like there's scenes in that movie where there's probably like 10-15 minutes of like no talking, and there's one part in that movie, I think there's like half an hour at one point with no talking in that movie. And then there's one shot in that movie that comes to mind immediately to me. There's a woman smoking a cigarette for like 3 minutes, and she's just sitting there smoking a cigarette. Like that is a very deliberately like slow cinema, enigmatic kind of esoteric film. This is not as much like that. This is a little bit more like Rebels of the Neon God, which is a more like straight ahead kind of like wayward youth, kind of like street kids drama movie, right? This is kind of in between the two, but leaning, I think, more towards the Rebels of the Neon God side of things. But if you're not into those types of movies, like this is a slice of life drama about people feeling like extreme isolation in urban, Taipei and Taiwan in the early 1990s. Like if that doesn't appeal to you, you probably won't like this movie. But I freaking love this movie. I thought it was fascinating. It's such an interesting study with Rebels of the Neon God. The Lee Kang-shang character in this movie is the same character he played in Rebels of the Neon God. So I feel like I can't really talk about this movie without talking about the other movie, because it's not really a sequel, but it continues on in a similar kind of way, but it's not exactly the same. Like it doesn't quite have the same, I would say, like ruthless nihilism and isolation of that film. There's a little bit, although that movie does have warmth and humor in it as well. The warmth and the humor in these films really comes from the character relationships, more so than it comes from the world in which they live. So what is this movie about? This woman here is a real estate agent, and the movie starts with her like being out for the night, and she meets this guy, and she takes him back to this empty apartment that she's been showing, and she sleeps with him. Now, at the same time, the character who she sleeps with is the Chen Chow-yung character. The Lee Kang-shang character, he finds a key to this apartment that is left in the door. He's a salesman, and he's going around whatever, selling stuff or delivering things that he's selling, and he finds a key to the apartment, and he takes it, and then he just goes in. He's like, oh, this is like a place I could go and like hang out, like in the middle of the city. I don't have to go home, whatever. I just go into this apartment. So he goes into the apartment. So there's this quirky, like weird kind of 90s indie strangeness and sense of humor about this film, because it's about like all of these people in this, like inhabiting this empty apartment, right, who are not necessarily supposed to be in there. But then in that, you see this really interesting metaphor for this woman as a real estate agent. So she's selling real estate, and a lot of what she sells is very empty. So it's like these high-rise apartment buildings with lots of empty apartments, or it's like an empty house that's being stripped and remodeled that she's selling. And so it's this idea that like there is no home, right? The city is becoming, it almost makes me think of Fight Club when he says these apartment buildings are filing cabinets for widows and young professionals, right? Like people are coming to the city for work. It's being filled up with these kind of yuppie types, right? And like the life of the city, the soul of the city is not there anymore. And in the kind of corporate explosion of the 1990s, when all of these cities around the world went from being these kind of derelict places they were in like the late 80s, 70s, whatever, when you had all these urban dystopian movies and stuff like that, right? And they become to be, they turned into these centers of like extreme wealth where people were moving from all over the country and all over the world to be there to get a piece of this wealth. The people who live there, the people who grew up there, start seeing the thing that was their home becoming this empty, meaningless shell, right? And I think that's a very important metaphor at the heart of this film, is that these people are all looking for real human connection. They're looking for medicine for their isolation. They're looking for some kind of relief from the things that are making them feel alone and depressed and in despair, and they can't find it because everywhere they go there is no home. There's just emptiness, right? It's very, in a way, it's almost like Ozu-esque, right? Because Ozu does a lot with physical space and the absence of people in space, or their presence in unexpected spaces, and human presence in empty spaces, or like the absence of human presence in like spaces that are homes and stuff like that, right? And it kind of reminded me of that. And it's very sad and very beautiful, but there's a lot of humor in the weirdness of this film as well. And so that, it, to me, differentiates it from Rebels of the Neon God, which has some warmth and humor in it, but it's not like an explicitly funny movie. And there's like some very funny stuff in this movie. Let me give you an example of this. And this is a tiny spoiler. It's basically the opening scene of the film. So this woman meets up with this guy. She goes to sleep with him, right? And the Lee Kang-shen character is already in the apartment because he's found the key. So they're in there having sex. He's gone in there to kill himself, which I know is like really dark, but it's really funny because he's like, oh shit, I gotta get out of here. So he's trying to sneak out, and he runs into the guy who slept with the woman who is also trying to sneak out, right? So they're both trying to escape without making any noise, and it's like really awkward and weird, but really funny too. And then they end up kind of becoming friends because they're like kind of co-inhabiting this weird empty space, and they both have these strange relationships with this woman where the Lee Kang-shen character, like, he never really knows her, but he's inhabiting her space, and the other guy's sleeping with her, obviously, right? And they become buddies in this kind of weird way. But another thing I found really interesting about this film is that the homoeroticism in this movie is much more pronounced than it is in Rebels of the Neon God. Like, the Lee Kang-shen character is very clearly, he's gay or he's bisexual or he's pansexual, right? But he's very attracted to this man. And he knows that he lives in a world in which he can't be with this, because I think he can tell from his interactions with the guy that the guy is not romantically or sexually interested in him, but also he knows that the world in which he lives is not a world in which he can have a relationship with this guy. And there's even a scene that I thought was really fascinating where he finds women's clothing in the apartment and he puts them on and he walks around like dressed in women's clothes, and you kind of get this feeling of like, is he seeing what he would look like as a woman, who he would be as a woman, how his life would be different as a woman, where he could be socially accepted for having this desire for a man, romantic desire, sexual desire? Or is he looking at like, this is who I would, he would want me if I could be this, that there would be no weirdness or awkwardness, and like we have this kind of buddy relationship, but what if it could be something more than that? And if I were dressed like this, if I were a woman, whatever, it's this really interesting thing of looking at gender and sexuality in societies that don't allow you to openly and fully express those things, or maybe you will face repercussions if you do, and how desires and despair and isolation and stuff like that revolve around these themes. And I thought that was really fascinating. And the character to me seems a lot more fleshed out than he is in Rebels of the Neon God in this film. He is much sadder, but you also get a lot of more humanity out of him too. It's also worth mentioning what he does for a job. He works at an ossuary, I believe it's called, which is where you sell like urns and like the like boxes for like bones after, like stuff like for bodies and like coffins and stuff like that, right? So again, you run into this theme of like everything is for sale, and the commercialism and the capitalism of the 1990s, moving out of the kind of urban isolation and dystopia of the 80s, which I think really permeates Rebels of the Neon God, because that came out, I think, in 1991. And it has really more of that late 80s kind of feeling, early 90s. This is much more like right in the heart of the 90s, mid 90s, right? When the capitalism is exploding, the commercialism is exploding, and this guy is literally selling death. And she is selling life because she is selling homes, right? So life is no longer something to be lived, and death is no longer something to be understood or to be honored or to kind of have it be part of like a ritualistic, religious, sacred, spiritual part of your life. It's just everything is something that's for sale. And you move through this world in which everyone is trying to take something from you instead of anyone trying to give anything to you. And so how do you find meaning in that? And there's another really amazing scene where the Li Kang-sheng character is at work and they're having like a team building exercise at work, and he goes into the room and he just can't, like, he just stands in the corner. Like, he can't find his way into the reverie and the closeness of the other people because he feels such extreme isolation. And it's such an incredible, it's like a great observational kind of dramedy scene, but it's also a really tremendous visual articulation of his despair. And this movie has a very much like a downer ending, despite the fact that it has a lot of warmth and humor throughout the movie. And to me, that strikes me as being like very much like a young person's ending, right? Because you have this very intense despair of being young and feeling isolation, and you don't have enough life experience and enough perspective to know that things will change. And even if your world doesn't change, you may change, and your perspective of your world may change, and you may find a meaningful human interaction at some point in that life. But when you are young and you are deep in that, and you have all those really intense emotions, and you don't exactly know how to work them out and articulate them and make sense of them, it's a very sad, and it's a place filled with despair, right? And that's a really, very much like a young person's kind of movie in a lot of ways, in a way that I think is honestly kind of beautiful in the honesty of its expression and stuff like that. I'm trying to think if there's anything else that I wanted to mention. Characters, the ending, homoeroticism, selling death, selling life. I mean, I think that's a pretty good overview of what I felt about this movie. I was really impressed by this movie, and I was really moved by this movie. That's the thing I love about Tsai Ming-liang as a filmmaker, is that I find myself like really emotionally moved by his films. This is the second run, this is the second run put out, Goodbye Dragon. This is Film Movement. So Film Movement is now a partner label of Vinegar Syndrome. So you can get this on the Vinegar Syndrome website, and you can also get Rebels of the Neon God, because that was put out by Big World Pictures, which is another Vinegar Syndrome partner label. So so these are the two guys who are also in Rebels of the Neon God. This is Li Kang-sheng, and this is Chen Chao-chong. And here's the disc there with just the reiteration of the same artwork. And then there's an essay in here. Let me show you the booklet. So you have credits there. It'll End in Tears by Nick Pinkerton is your essay here. And you get some pictures throughout. This is a very funny scene. This scene, I don't want to spoil it for you, but there's a lot of like really silly visual humor in this film. And there's a lot of really great like observational stuff and just like amazing like slice of life stuff in Taipei, where the characters are just like the woman who's a real estate agent. You see her just going around doing her job, and you see just like such cool footage of the city and what it was like at that time. And it's such a great, I like, one of the things that I talk about a lot with friends, or when I write movie reviews on Letterboxd or whatever, that I think I talk about on this channel as well, is the notion that I believe one of the true great potentials of cinema is the preservation of a time and a place, as it looked, as it was, who the people were who lived there, what they were doing, what their lives were like, the noises of the city, the sound, like in the way that you can kind of, if you've been in cities like that, you can kind of almost smell the city too, right? There's one scene where you can see, like, I think it's a character's hair, or it's like a tree, or you can see something blowing in the breeze, and you can see that it's, and they're wearing like, you know, light clothing, so they're not wearing jackets or anything. You're like, that's probably like a really nice like spring day, or like a really nice fall day, and they're just out on the street filming this movie, being young, making art. Like, film is the preservation of culture at the same time as it is the creation of culture. I think that that's one of the things that's so beautiful about it. There's a 29-minute long interview with Tsai Ming-liang on here, which is incredible, and I highly recommend you check it out. I loved the the interview with him on the Goodbye Dragon Inn Blu-ray, and I love the interview with him on here. And he talks about how he started out working in TV. I didn't know anything about that. He wrote tons of TV, and then he started directing some TV. He started directing some theater, and then someone approached him and was like, hey, do you want to make a movie? And he felt like, well, he really wanted to make a movie about urban life and about isolation, about young people and stuff like that. So that's kind of the path his early films took, kind of like exploring those themes and stuff like that. He talks about the history of Taiwanese cinema, which I really know nothing about. That's fascinating. He talks about the Taiwanese New Wave and how he was just kind of like in the right place at the right time of the right age and became a part of that kind of group of filmmakers and stuff like that. So really great interview. So highly recommended. So Vive l'Amour, released in 1994, the Taiwanese tragicomic drama. I don't know what you would call this movie. I guess it's kind of just a drama, but it's a really beautiful, very affecting film that I absolutely loved. I am 110% a Tsai Ming-liang stan now. I love all of his movies that I've seen. They're all like 5-star movies to me. Can't wait to go to the theater and to see him do this Q&A at a screening of this film. There's going to be a second one showing after it, which I haven't seen before. So I'm really excited to check that out. My name is Will. You are watching Hong Kong Cinema Appreciation Society. As always, we thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.